Hello, and welcome to Insights Everywhere, where we have the privilege of hearing advice, ideas, experience, and perspectives from rare talent in the world of brand, marketing, and leadership from around the world. Today we have with us Eric Solomon, who is the founder and CEO of the Human OS. Eric has a fascinating and wide-ranging background working at the intersection of cognitive psychology, technology, creativity, culture, and business for nearly 30 years. He's held executive leadership positions at top technology brands, including YouTube, Spotify, and Instagram. And prior to that, he earned his PhD in cognitive science with a focus on language processing and artificial intelligence, well before ChatGPT was invented. So, Eric, without further ado, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for this, Jason. And thanks for that intro, and thanks for dealing with my moody lighting here in New York City. So we'll deal with it. Can't have the overheads on.
It's all good. As we talked about before, I think I'm most excited for this conversation. Just in that, getting to know you over these past months and years since we first connected. Just you come from your place of yourself, and there's no smoke and mirrors, nothing hiding behind anything. And really coming away from those meetings, I've always felt really inspired and always had a ton to think about. So excited to dig in a little bit more today and share it with the world, which I know you do a lot of anyway. So for those watching today, I think it'd be great, if you could just provide a little bit more context maybe on your background and the unique journey that you've had. I know that you've gone from a very highly technical field and PhD into brand building, into leadership and transformation. And so maybe just to start, I know that's a big and loaded question, but take us on a little bit of that journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. And feel free to cut me off if I take this longer than you want it to go. So you can stop me anytime. But I guess, the first thing I do, and, I feel like I often have to caveat this just to ground myself a little bit. But I think when people hear PhD and those companies, they assume some amount of systemic privilege that's attached to those things. And it's hard to blame them, especially with the way that I just show up in the world. But, I guess, the for me, even going down the academic path to start out with was a bit of an act of rebellion in my family, given that nobody in my family, they barely made it out of high school. And I was raised by a single mom that had 3 jobs, which meant 0 money, because that's how that works. When people have, the more jobs they have. And, a dad that I couldn't live with due to his profession in life. So I wasn't allowed to live with him. And so the start of my career and going into academia was, to be the first person in my family to go to college. So it was all driven by pure necessity of not having the life that my parents had. So, it seems like it was all planned out and strategic, but the reason that I, ended up going and getting an undergrad degree and then going into a PhD program in cognitive psychology was purely because I went to the places that paid for me to go. So it was pretty amazing. I happened to get interested in language and the structure of language. So I studied computational linguistics at a time when it was really unfashionable to do that and super dorky to do that. This was in the 90s. And then when I entered the program, in cognitive psychology with a focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence, it was still the 90s and it was completely in a trough. Nobody was really studying it, which is probably why they allowed me to get in. So I was attached this entire time to government funding, which meant that I was really young by the time I got out of the academic system. So not many people earn their PhDs by the time they're 25. Ones that do are usually smarter than me. So for me, it was not intelligence. It was like the sheer drive of necessity, or I get my funding cut. So I did that. And, when I was 25, I had like a lot of people, like probably everyone when we're 25, really don't have a clue what we're doing in life. whatsoever. So all I knew was the path that I was on. So I continued on that path and ended up looking for postdoctoral positions, thinking I was going to be a professor because, what else did I know at that point? And the one I had accepted was at the medical school at UCSF, and it was at the intersection of big data and tech and big data and corporations, because I was looking at how big tobacco had basically manipulated big data sets to get kids hooked onto smoking. So they had all this data knowing that kids were highly susceptible. They hired hypnotists and stuff like that. It was pretty wild. And, as part of this work, they were like, well, you don't know anything about counter marketing or advertising at all, which is what we need to do to get the tobacco industry right sized. So why don't you interview people in that space? And, through those interviews, I started to realize, and other people started to realize, that I'm not an academic at all. I don't enjoy the academic setting. I'm much better in team settings and in leadership settings. And so I got poached into business through interviews that I did in the academic world. And, so I was on a pretty sturdy path. I started in the creative agency world as a planner, a brand strategist, people might have heard, and doing things from a quantitative perspective because that was my background, always in technology. Did that for a while. And then through some of that work, got poached in to co-found a team at YouTube back in, it was 2010, 2011. And this was the very start of digital video and brands using digital video. And I started to get more into this emerging space of tech platforms and what role they played. And that was my first experience leading really, really big teams, and really enjoyed that and working on a global level. Um, and then about 4.5 years into that, I was giving a talk, and the founder of Spotify and his assistant were in the audience, and they came up to me and asked, "Hey, would you be interested in applying to come work for us? We just hired our CMO. We're looking for our first head of brand. You seem like you might be good at that given your background." And so I applied, and, to some extent, I should caveat being like, that was a bit of a dream job because of my love of music and the intersection of music and technology and storytelling. It all kind of came together. But of course, at that perfect corporate moment in life, that's when really my world started to shift. And, I do talk openly about this, and it can be hard to hear. But, I moved out to start that job in August of 2015. And in March of 2016, I was coming back from this big leadership team meeting in Stockholm where Spotify is headquartered. When I landed, I had a couple of voicemails from the hometown where I grew up, and it was from the chief of police who told me that that morning my father had been found in his backyard, hit in the head. And it was like this moment of pure and utter, my father, even though I didn't grow up with him, he stood large in my life as a friend and as an advisor to me. Spoke 3 times a week and looked up to him very much. And then boom, he was gone. And not boom, there was a federal investigation opened up and a criminal investigation opened up. And so I had a gag order, wasn't allowed to talk about this. And during that time, of from 2016 to 2018, it's crazy because I look so buttoned up on paper. I look like I climbed this corporate ladder in such a strategic way, but I ended up, uh, I got fired from Spotify, and then ended up going back to Google where I'd been with YouTube, but I went back to Google leading up an AI marketing team. And then I just took a trajectory up and to the right for a while, pouring myself into work. I became the head of marketing on the business side for Instagram, in charge of growing a $10 billion business globally. And it was, took everything out of me as you could possibly imagine. And then I was poached in by Andy Dunn, the founder of Bonobos, to be his new CMO, as he has elevated his CMO to the CEO. And that was in 2018. And it's like the universe just has a way, right? It was about 5 months into that job that I got the news, got another call that due to lack of evidence, all charges on my dad's criminal investigation were dropped and deemed inconclusive. So I'll never truly have closure on a really transformational event. And that's when I took a step back and realized like the path that I was on was one that I had done fairly unthinkingly. It's not that I didn't like it at the time. I just didn't put any intention into it whatsoever. It was climbing a predetermined path up and to the right. And, I realized that even though we understand that things like this and our phones run on an operating system, that's the foundation of everything we do, I didn't understand what my own operating system was, what my human operating system was, what I stood for, what I was trying to go for, and what my approach was to doing that. Instead, I was just blindly following a path. So in 2019, I said goodbye to the corporate world. And for the last 5 years, I've been running my own company called the Human Operating System, which is truly about a foundational brand building from the inside out, which is understanding that brand is a system, and that system is as much about employees and about the planet as it is about what we say to our customers. And so I really work with leadership teams to figure out who they are, who they want to be, not just externally, but internally. And the only last thing I'd say, and then, I appreciate you not cutting me off through this long saga that I've tried to condense, but here I am 5 years into it, but I'm at a place now where I'm really interested in only working with people who are one, good people, truly good people who have their intention set towards trying to truly make incremental change to make this world better, not worse. So people that are not just interested in developing products for the world, but developing solutions for the world. And so that's where I'm really at now. So a lot of the work that I do is revolved around helping people truly make change, big or small, through innovation.
Got it. No, I definitely didn't want to cut you off because, again, I think there's such, I mean, richness to everything that you just discussed and how that got you to where you are today, which is super important, I think, as we talk about everything else in this conversation. I'd love to maybe kind of hear a bit more about your shift into the human OS to start, what the genesis of that was, and ultimately, you know, how you've seen that start to manifest based on where businesses and brands are today, where leaders are today, what the gaps are, what people are the challenges they're facing, and maybe how they're thinking about brand or leadership differently or not at all where they need to be to get to their desired end result. So yeah, would love to hear more about the human OS and how that's grown to date.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it started out. The human OS started out with really saying, I need some kind of systemic way of trying to get to the heart of who I want to be as a leader, and not just who I want to be and who I am, but what steps and approaches do I have towards leadership and towards being a leader? How do I go about communicating that so that people understand what I do and who I am? And then, like, truly, what do I stand for in this world? What's my belief system, and how do I translate that into tangible behaviors that people can measure? And so I started out by saying, I'm going to take myself on as a project and as a client and do that work to try to figure myself out. And then I said, okay, well, if I can do that for myself, what I need to do is figure out how to visualize this and how to bring this to in a way that people can really understand what I'm talking about. And the way that I started to build it over time is really through understanding that as much as we understand that an atom is a building block of life and the atomic structure is something that everybody's familiar with. It's a simple atom, it's what we're made of. In a very similar way, I use that same kind of atomic structure to talk about the human operating system in terms of something that's a building block for leaders and a building block for businesses. And the way that I really think about it is I am so tired of, in the brand marketing and branding world, of people using words that have become meaningless for the most part. I think people use words like vision and mission interchangeably. People talk about values, but they don't mean anything. I can't tell you how many companies I've worked in that say they stand for one thing and then act completely the opposite of what they say their values are. And then people that truly at their core don't know who they are because they've never done the introspection that it takes. Just like people can go through their whole lives without understanding who they are if they don't put a little work into the introspection that it takes to understand that. So, I really think about it as business psychology, which is really helping people uncover the truth about who they are, and then then backing up that truth with behaviors that they commit to in order to enact that. And what I saw was in 2019, it felt like I was truly selling a vitamin. People were like, "That's great. Great to have it. I'll take it every day if I need to." And then it was boom, sort of COVID hit, and there was distributed workforces, and people felt like they were losing control over their own people within organizations. And that's when people really started to call me and say, "You're right, we've never codified what we're about. We've got a bunch of people that are onboarding virtually, and we're not going to ever come back to full time. We might be hybrid forever. If we don't start to codify these things, we're not going to have any way of ensuring that everybody that works for us is marching to the same beat." And so it became more of a painkiller for people, for those, especially during those early years of COVID. And then, of course, once start things like recessions start to hit and people start to get more conservative. I think right now, especially with the rise of generative AI, there's a new type of freak out that's going on right now where people are panicking and not knowing what the hell they're going to do to manage the technology onslaught that's coming on. So what I've done is translated some of the work that I've done with the human OS to helping people develop what is your point of view around AI adoption? What's your AI strategy? Not what are you going to execute on, but what is your ambition? What ethical commitments are you making? And then how do you go about communicating it in a way that aligns to the values of the company? So more and more I've been called on, and the human OS has evolved from just helping people do foundational brand storytelling for their company inside and out to transitional business transformation. Because now they're like, how do we talk about AI? How do we think about future technology? So I'm starting to get really excited about playing in that space more.
For sure. And I think it's really interesting, again, how you just said, like, you started off and your background up before starting the Human OS was really in this brand centric world, but
Yeah.
how that really transformed into something much bigger, more holistic, and impactful for these companies. And I think the more that we do work with different brands, and brands even ask, what is, or companies will ask, what's the ROI of this brand work that we're doing, or what is the impact? And it's often quite ambiguous, but nonetheless, again, I think at its core and when done right, it does have that more transformative impact that really seeps into every aspect, decision, behavior of every company and each employee. So I think to
100%.
the way that you're thinking about it and the way that you've evolved brand is actually the truest promise of what brand can be for a company itself, as opposed to just some, nice words or visuals that happen to come across. So I think
Yeah,
there,
I hear that. Increasingly, I don't view brand as the kind of packaging that you put out to the external world, even though that's an important part of the brand. That's, if you think about an iceberg, that's the tip that's sticking out of the water. But the rest of brand should exist in the OKRs of a company. Brand should exist in the performance management systems of a company and the onboarding of employees in a company, in the commitment to what they're going to do outside of the walls of the company for their communities and their planets. That's what brand is, not just what you slap on your package and the pretty colors that you use.
how many companies do you see actually applying brand in that way or that well?
I find that the companies that get the most, that have the most credibility and are dominating the market don't do this work. Um, by and large, this is absent from a lot of corporate America. Um, that's why increasingly the companies that I work with are not the traditional companies in corporate America. Again, it goes back to the incentives that people are aligned to. If we only think that the purpose of a business is to increase profit for our shareholders, for our stockholders, then it makes it really difficult to convince anybody that doing this stuff matters. But I do believe that younger people, and I do believe that younger businesses, and I believe that people that are trying to be category creators and disrupt businesses are thinking about the role of business differently and are not just thinking about return on investment and not just thinking about productivity and efficiency, but thinking about the quality outcomes that they want to deliver on. And, so long as there's a few of those, I don't care about the rest of the world. I just care about who I care about.
Makes sense. How do you see when, the companies you work with, and you mentioned the impact for them and not, only being focused on just the shareholder value bottom line, but, when you're working with a client and they're implementing this methodology and taking a more complete picture and view, what benefits are they seeing at the end of the day, and how does that impact their business then?
Yeah, I mean the biggest bit, we forget, or we often, it's easy to forget that what companies are and what businesses are collections of people that are working together towards an outcome. And when you're able to do this work and you've got a workforce that's not just aligned but committed and energized on a bedrock of psychological safety and of dependability and accountability, they find meaning and impact in the work that they're doing. The outcome is not just 10x but 100x what the outcome is when you've got a bunch of people that are punching the clock and showing up, or dealing with toxic leadership, or having one conversation on Slack channels, but other conversations face to face. And so very often the outcome that I've had is a better product delivery, better customer experience for the people that are delivering the customer experience, that leads to increased ROI and better profits. So I think this impacts the triple bottom line.
Hmm. And where does it start, I guess? Who are you working with in organizations?
I think it's both top down and bottom up. So it's got to start, especially with younger organizations, it's got to start with leadership, in particular, leadership teams. But you can't exclude early employees or people that are quote unquote rank and file employees from the conversation. So it starts with really discovery, really understanding who these people are, what matters to them. One question that I always like to ask a CEO, and all of them, I've heard now 50 to 60 different answers to these to the CEOs that I've worked with. But, you're a talented person. You're a talented, smart, invested, engaged person. You could be doing anything in the world. Why the hell are you doing this? And this opens up the doors to conversations that they're not used to having with people. I tell you the stories that I've heard and the amount of vulnerability that people will give me by truly understanding why they've chosen this path, and without just the understanding that they're trying to make money, because it's never that. Founders don't start companies to do that.
Hmm.
Not that alone.
Interesting. And then I guess once you identify that with the founder, what are the steps that they usually need to take to then instill that through the organization?
Yeah, so the general process, right, works out with discovery, not just with them, but across their leadership team, and an agreed upon set of people to talk to across the organization and outside the organization. Once you get to a place where you've got a human OS built, I'll then work across their different organization, their silos within their organizations, whether it's HR or operations or product or marketing to sit and translate what that OS then means for team behavior. So, and for how they're going to, what their OKRs are going to be for a team, how they're going to then interact with each other on the team, what matters for them in order to provide, to deliver on the results that they've committed to. So I take that a lot of that ownership off the leadership team. Their job as a leader, as a leadership team, or as a leader, is to be the shepherd of that work, but not necessarily to be the ones that are implementing it.
Mhm.
They've got too much on their plates, and they're pulled too many different directions from both internal and external stakeholders.
Makes sense. And would you say that I mean, when this work is looked at internally, is it looked at brand building, leadership, um, management? How would it be, I guess, positioned within an organization?
Yeah, the best, really, the most simple way that anybody can understand is it's both about internal and external positioning.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uh, and that involves storytelling, but it's what is the foundational internal and external positioning that you have for consumer brand.
Got it. And I guess before I think we'll, I'm resisting the urge to just ask you about AI, given how much of the world is asking questions about AI right now. But I think the one fascinating thing about, your trajectory and path was going from really, I think what you said, even a data centric everything to more of a human centric everything in the way that you work. But how has, I guess, your experience both from in what you studied, your early work experience, at your work at the various different companies that you've been at, from Spotify to Instagram, YouTube, Google, how has that influenced, and what, I guess, learnings have you taken away from some of those experiences that you're able to now apply, that allows you to do what you do today?
Yeah, and I hear you on the AI. It's like where isn't that conversation being had right now? So, we'll steer clear. But I mean, I guess if you throw AI into, no matter how transformational the technology really is going to be, whether it's the new electricity or not, you can say with every technological shift, we always see people go through this initial stage of panicking and being like, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" What's interesting, though, from the experience that I've had is, partially the reason I've been hired at these places to do brand work or communications work has been because I also have a background in AI, and none of this is particularly new. Companies have been using advanced technology, including generative AI systems, for a long time now. It just hasn't hit the consumer facing market in the way that it has now. It hasn't led to the frothed mouth gold strike of 49er level where's the mother load experience. So what I've taken from it is I'm really, really comfortable in helping people navigate digital transformation in organizations, because I've been foundational to organizations' digital transformation agendas. So I view AI or any advanced technology as part of navigating digital transformation. And again, it's related to communication, because I think the one thing that people forget all the time is that as much as CEOs and leadership teams are freaked out about what's going on, employees within organizations are doubly freaked out because they're also concerned about their jobs being eliminated. And so nobody's communicating appropriately around what they're thinking about, what their ambitions are, what their strategy is to approaching this kind of stuff. So what I've learned is think before act. And I can't say every company I've done's done a great job of that. Working for companies that have mantras like "move fast and break things" will eventually break things. But Spotify was a great example, though, of when I joined. They had just acquired Echo Nest, which is one of the largest AI-based music discovery platforms ever to have existed. And one of the first things we did was get together product, marketing, design, business, and talk about what was going to be our company's approach to how we were going to use AI in a consumer facing way to deliver experiences that didn't feel creepy but felt additive, which is why you have things like Wrapped or Year in Music or Discover Weekly as part of those products, is that we thought very strategically about it. So what I've learned is how to help companies do thinking before acting. And that's where I'm most valuable to them in these cases. And that's what I'm looking to do more of, is to help companies really not slow down, but rather to understand that the better they figure out what an articulation of what their strategy is, the better they're going to be able to execute, and the more comfort and relief of anxiety they're going to have for themselves and for the rest of their workforce and their customers for that matter.
Makes sense for sure. I think, yeah, most people are just throwing AI and slapping AI on the back of
How
their
many new companies have .ai at the end of their, yeah,
that
right.
versus something that is really material. And I think even what we see very frequently today, any sort of technology of any type and flavor, who even in their positioning want to slap AI powered, enabled, something involved, versus before they even figure out what it is that they're truly applying this technology for and how that's different. So I think from a business and a product perspective, it's one thing. And then I think also just from running a brand and or marketing organization, there's another dynamic of, again, how that impacts your workforce, your workflow, and how you're communicating with customers too, but with all of the pros and cons that come with it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just, I think it's related to all of future of work, which is, like, everybody, for a while people are talking about how everybody's going to need to become or how people are going to value, companies are going to value prompt engineers. The reality is everybody's going to have to be a prompt engineer. There's not going to be a special role for that. Everybody's going to have to know how to prompt large language models to get the output we need. So who should companies be hiring? And this is a future work conversation that I've been having more and more frequently, which is not just on the marketing side, but what kind of talent should you be looking for? And how do you ensure that that talent's who they say they are?
Absolutely. Especially with everything coming from AI, different applications itself. Uh,
Right.
so
So it's been a fascinating time because it really is in this intersection of technology, creativity, and storytelling is where I like to play the most. And I think that AI has presented nothing but an opportunity for me there in a lot of ways, just like it's provided an opportunity for a lot of people once you get through all the fear.
So, just conscious of your time here, because I know we just have a little bit left. I would be curious just to hear, I guess, a few parting questions. One of which being, if you're leading an organization, a brand or marketing organization, or any sort of kind of business or business unit today, how would you start to think about and diagnose, the need for something like, again, the human OS, or kind of shifting the perspective in, uh, the way that they're approaching their organization, business, and brand? What are the kind of, I guess, telltale signs that you might have an opportunity there?
I think a telltale sign is that you see a lot of slick external communications and slick external advertising, but then you can see on Indeed or Glassdoor that the employee experience is less than par, or the CEO's got a 50% approval rating. Um, or you see outward blasting on platforms like LinkedIn or TikTok, where people are work shaming their boss. So I mean, you've got young people who are totally unfiltered about how they feel about work environments, and I really worry that the command and direct style of leadership that was I've been subject to, and it was very prominent through the 80s, before the 80s, through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, is just, not going to be accepted in the future. So the telltale sign of people doing really slick Super Bowl ads, but then having really shitty work cultures and really shitty communications internally, uh, I think it's more common than it is not common. And so the diagnosing is fairly easy, but the signs are everywhere. You can't hide anymore because people have a voice.
Is there any other, I guess, just advice or thoughts that we didn't cover yet in terms of just the overall system and that you think is be important to include?
Only just the overarching thing that I've been thinking about, a lot lately and write about a lot lately, which is just, it's very, very easy to take accountability for the things that are super easy to measure. And so it's really easy to measure things that are productive and efficient and generate a lot of money. It's super easy to measure all those things. And all of those things are super important to a business thriving. But truly, the myopic focus on those things that are just easy to quantify because you can measure them easily doesn't diminish the value of the things that are more quality and the things that are more qualitative in nature. And I really want to see businesses embrace qualitative thinking and subjectivity and understand that I'm a measurement person. I came from teaching statistics, but to think that you can measure the hell out of everything and that you're going to get the good quality outcomes from that is ludicrous. So the only thing I would just say is just put a little of that spotlight on better quality outcomes for people, not just on the easy things that are measurable. And you'll find that the things that are easy to measure go up as well.
Absolutely. I think that's powerful. And I think just, I guess, to turn the tables a little bit on you in terms of an immeasurable outcome, I'd love to ask you, because I think you've mentioned it a little bit to me before, is what is your intention for the new year?
Thanks for asking. I mean, intentions for the new year are always fun because they're not resolutions, right? They're not, I don't resolve to do anything, but, 5 years into to really running my own company and doing a lot of things, my own, generating my own IP and doing everything I can to get that IP out into the world and all of that, I think has made me super boring. And I'm so tired of my own medicine. And so like the openness to what I'm calling radical collaboration is really the intention for 2024. And radical in this case really means by I'm not just looking to collaborate, but I'm looking to collaborate with good people who are truly not interested in just the status quo, but making change big or small. So for me, that is the intention for this year, and I'll say that divorced from expected outcome. Who knows what I can achieve, but I can at least intend to do that and see what happens.
Well, I would definitely counter. I don't think that what you're putting out is boring in any way, shape, or form, although you might be bored by the material. But as you are, again, as you mentioned, kind of that you are, again, both speaking, writing, on the lookout for new collaborators. What's the best way to for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, best way is obviously so I do a weekly Substack that I've just started. I started back in October, so it's gaining momentum in the way that those things gain momentum, which is it gained all the momentum and now it's hit a plateau. So looking, that's how these things go. But I have a Substack called In Pursuit of Quality, which I'm sort of putting out both new and old ideas into and doing my best to keep those pithy and short. And then otherwise, LinkedIn is really the only social platform I use anymore. Although it ain't perfect, I find it is a good place that to connect with people in a more professional environment than other social networks that are not set up to do that. So LinkedIn's got problems, but that's a good place. So I'd say through LinkedIn and through my Substack are best places. I have a website, like all websites, it's deeply outdated, but that website is thehumanos.co. So there's those.
Sounds great. Well, again, that was incredibly insightful and interesting, and I want to thank you again for spending the time with us to share all of your experience. And again, just being so open and transparent with everything that you've kind of both been through and what shapes what you're doing and where you got to today. So thank you again for spending the time, and as always, and look forward to, hopefully collaborating even in the new year.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me. Really appreciated the conversation and hope that it made some lick of sense.
I think so. All right. Have a great night.